The morning of April 1st, 1922 in Germany was unsettlingly quiet. A man waking up from his sleep in the silence of a large remote house. Just days ago he had been sleeping in a state of homelessness on the cold ground, but now he could stretch out on a warm, inviting bed. It felt almost too good to be true. He rose slowly, his movements deliberate, and he reminded himself of the busy day he had ahead. But first, breakfast. He cracked some eggs in the pan, causing smoke to rise up the chimney, a small sound that comforted him in the otherwise very silent house. A full stomach is very much needed for him to get his stuff done today. He headed out to the farm next to the house, feeding the animals almost mechanically, and then he went on to let the dog loose to do his business. Every day the same routine. Yet today he knew something was different. Today he's gonna do something about the smell that was coming up from the barn. He entered the barn, the dim lights entering through the cracks of the wooden walls, and slowly he started to begin his task. One by one he stacked them, the bodies, stiff and lifeless on top of each other. His hands worked with precision as he concealed them beneath a blanket of hay, as if to erase all traces of his work. Because this was Hinterkaifeck, the infamous farmstead where an entire family has been murdered. Their killer had lingered in their home for days, moving through rooms, eating their food, and making the house his own before vanishing into the shadows without a trace. Content warning. This video includes description of violence, murder, death, rituals, and other supernatural content. Listener discretion is advised, as some stories may be unsettling or sensitive to certain audiences. Turn down the lights, snuggle up tight, and get ready for another Tug Tale. What happens when the line between folklore and fact blurs? Welcome to Tug Tales, where urban legends meet true crime and myth aren't always just stories. My name is Safrina, your host for today's episode.
And my name is Diski.
And now, I've always been intrigued by true crime, but murders that have quite no resolution at the end of it, like a cold case, it always disturbs me.
Yeah, of course.
I feel like I watch the episode or read and then, oh, that's it? Like, nobody's caught? Is a weird one, right? On the morning of April 4th, 1922, Lawrence Schlittenbauer noticed that the house beside his house, his neighbor's house, the mail was starting to stack up. So, worried that something was wrong at the farm as it looked like nobody had picked up the mail for days, he called for backup from his fellow neighbors, Jacob Siegel and Michael Pohl. So together, they walked to the front door of their neighbor's house and they knocked. But with every knock, they found themselves getting more and more uneasy. Why wasn't anybody answering the door? Since the door was locked, they moved toward the barn where they discovered their neighbors, only this time they had become lifeless bodies. Stacked on top of each other, covered in hay, were the bodies of 3 generations. Victoria Gabriel, 35 years old, and her 7-year-old daughter, Kazila, and Victoria's parents, Andreas Gruber, 64 years old, and Kazila Gruber, 72 years old. 3 generations of the family were killed with multiple blows to the head. They were shocked, but maybe because they wanted to investigate more, or I'm not sure what went to their heads, but they went to the main house through a hallway that connected the barn to the house. And inside was no better than the situation at the barn, because they had found the bodies of the family's 44-year-old maid, Maria Baumgartner, and another child of Victoria's, a 2-year-old baby Joseph.
Aww.
Both of them were seen to have also been hit to death in their beds. Finding all the members of the house dead, they freaked out and bolted out of the home, and they alerted each other's families and fellow neighbors about what they had found. They didn't go straight to the police. They went and spread the news around.
Why?
Back then, I don't know what they were thinking. But there was also one more. It's because the closest police department to Hinterkaifeck was in Munich, about 75 kilometers away from the house. So by the time the investigators had arrived, because of the amount of people who knew about what happened, the crime scene was horrifyingly damaged. I'm talking dozens of footprints from people who wanted to see what happened, evidence being destroyed, tampering of the scene, and worst of all, no forensic testing was even available at the time. They were found 4 days after their murders, which supposedly happened on 31st March 1922. So after the police investigated and they ruled out that it couldn't be a robbery, they had some other theories, even though so many things were going wrong in the investigation. But before I get to that, I'm gonna tell you a bit about the family, their backgrounds, and the events leading up to their deaths. The Hinterkaifeck farmstead, the house, was a very lonesome place. It was located away from the town, very far away, about an hour drive from Munich, but the house looked to be like any normal house, honestly. It was the home of Victoria Gabriel and her 2 children, Kazila and Joseph, as well as her elderly parents, Andreas and Kazilia Gruber, who were all found murdered in their house. Victoria Gabriel, the daughter, actually lost her husband during World War I, a few years before the death of the family. So if you remember, she has a 7-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son, but she lost her husband, which means that it's of course not her husband's son. And thus, lots of rumors came from this because she was not married again. Some think that it's the son of Lawrence, the neighbor that had first discovered the bodies, because they were known to have had a relationship. Both of them came out to claim that Joseph was indeed their son and they planned to get married, but Andreas, her dad, refused to accept it. He just didn't want her to get married to him. But maybe there is another reason why the dad said no, because there's a sinister side to the dad. Some think that the son was actually from incest between Victoria and her father Andreas. In the village, it was public knowledge that Andreas had been raping his own daughter, and they even both went to jail for this.
Really?
Both of them went to jail for incest. So people believe that maybe it's the dad's son, grandson. I don't know. It's a weird relation.
It could be her own siblings, but
Yeah.
it come from her own womb. So
Yeah.
it's like her son, her
And
daughter,
brother.
but like brother and sister.
Now let's talk about Andreas, the dad. When you ask their neighbors, they usually have only bad things to say about him. They said that he was an extremely aggressive person towards everybody, including his neighbors, and not even his family is excluded. Neighbors recounted how brutal he treated his wife, his children, and his grandchildren. If you ever get him mad, he doesn't just shout at you. What he does is he would take the nearest weapon he sees around him, whether it was a pitchfork or a shotgun, and then he'll start swaying it around. His children were often subjected to so much abuse that he would lock them in the cold cellar for days during winter. And the worst part of it is that Victoria was not their only child. There was another daughter called Sophie who died from the abuse the dad inflicted on her. As for the other members of the family, I don't quite know how their personality is or their characteristics, but people often say that the family was known to keep to themselves. They didn't really gossip much, they didn't have conversations or mingle outside of their house, which is why it took several days for people to even notice that they weren't anywhere to be seen. But things had already taken a weird turn even months before their death, specifically 6 months before. In around September of 1921, the family maid who had taken care of the little kids suddenly just out of nowhere quit her job. When people asked her why, she said that she felt the house was haunted. She said that she would hear strange noises in the house coming from the attic, things being misplaced that she knows she didn't put those things there, but suddenly they're there, and just occurrences that would make her skin crawl every single day. She quit the job, and it took them another 6 months after that to hire a new maid. And they hired a new maid on the day of their murder.
Wow.
So it's like the maid just got hired to get murdered.
Just so unlucky.
Super unlucky.
Yeah.
A few days before the ill-fated day, Andreas found something on the table of their house. It was a newspaper from Munich, the 75 kilometers town away. But the odd thing is, it wasn't his newspaper. You know how back then, if you want to get a newspaper, you have to subscribe, and the people come and throw the newspaper in and stuff? You don't just get it randomly, you have to pay for a subscription fee. So he asked everybody in in his family, and nobody had subscribed to that newspaper. So whose newspaper is that? But with little things like this, you'd never know it was actually a sign before it was too late. So he just brushed the newspaper.
Because there is somebody inside of the house.
Not just that, Andreas also realized that he had lost a key to the farmhouse, and nobody said they've seen it, and things are starting to get really, really weird. One morning, he woke up, and when he walked outside of the house, he noticed something strange in the snow. And when he looked closely, he inspected the snow. It looked like a set of footprints. So he followed it. He tracked the footprints, which he found led from the forest all the way to the broken door in the farm's machine room. He looked around but didn't find anyone, so he went back to his house. But that night is the same night that his family said they heard footsteps in the attic. Like someone was in the attic walking around the house. But when they told Andreas this and he went to investigate, he still said there was nobody there. He couldn't find anybody there. So this is probably why the maid said the house was haunted. We have no idea if the killer was there the whole time or it's just his feelings, or we have no idea. He then told his neighbors about all of this and anybody who was listening. But in the end though, he didn't report it to the police because you don't think much of these things, right? It's like, oh, maybe it's a bird. Maybe it's a tree. On March 30, just one day before the murders, Victoria had had a fight with her parents, resulting in shouts and violence, and she actually fled the farm that night and was found in the deep forest hours later, where she eventually said, okay, I'll just go back home. So she went back home. But a lot of people theorize and ask questions like, was it a real coincidence that they were fighting just a day before their deaths? Finally, on 31st March, the new maid arrived. Maria Baumgartner had been driven by her sister to start her first day taking care of Victoria's children. But can you imagine how bad her luck must have been that she started the same job on the same day that she was murdered? And at some point during the late evening that day, Andreas and his wife Kazilia, along with their daughter Victoria and their granddaughter Kazilia, were led away from the house one at a time to a farmstead barn through the stable, where they were attacked and eventually murdered. So they were led one by one to the barn. The killer, or because we don't know, maybe multiple killers, had used a mattock similar to a pickaxe belonging to the family and inflicted blows to their head. The police didn't know if they lured them all together or maybe they took one by one inside and killed them, but all of them were in the barn except for the maid and the 2-year-old baby. After killing them, the killer went into the living quarters and using the same weapon had killed Joseph, who was sleeping in his bassinet, and Maria, who was found dead in her own bed. And even though they were found 4 days after their deaths and the neighbor had gone because the mail was piling up, people actually felt a bit weird that they never saw them, but they never did anything about it. Like back then, I think it's neighbors are very tight-knit. They would realize, right? But 4 days, because the family is known to be quiet and reserved, they didn't really bother much. Like for example, the day after the murder, 2 men knocked on the door of the house with the intention of selling coffee, but they received no reply. Instead of leaving directly, they went to the window and they knocked some more to see if someone's inside. Noticing something strange, they walked around the yard because they had this uneasy feeling, but still, they didn't see anybody in the house. The only thing they noticed was the gate to the machine house was open. The machine house was where the footprints that Andreas found led to. But they didn't want to be busybody, so they just left the house at that point. And over the next few days, before they got found, the school that Kazila attended had also found it weird that she was absent without excuses. People at church found it really strange that they didn't see the family on Sunday, but ultimately nothing came out of that. On April 4, before their bodies were found, on the same day, a local mechanic named Albert even showed up to repair an engine of the farm. He knocked, he waited and sat down for an hour for the family because technically they had an appointment. He was supposed to be there. But the family never came, so he thought, I'll just go and do the repairs and then leave. So he waited for an hour and he even did his repairs. And he was there for 4.5 hours without ever finding them. And at 3:30 p.m. on the same day, Lawrence, along with several others, came to the house and found their bodies. What do you think about the crime scene so far?
It's really suspicious, And the thing that I think the murderer really clumsy. He left so many evidence.
But nothing came out of it, sadly. So the police started their investigation, and it didn't take them long to realize that this was not going to be an easy case. So when they walked inside the house, the first thing they noticed that was odd was the calendar on the wall. As it was determined that the murders happened on 31st March, they found it odd that the calendar showed the date for April 1st, the day after. That means that someone else other than the family had torn off the page. You know, calendars back in the days one
Yeah.
page. So they had to tear off the calendar. Possibly the killer or the killers stayed there after the murder. And this theory was even more backed from evidence of the bodies being moved, and even meals were seen in the kitchen after the murders happened.
Oh.
The bodies were moved. It was put on top of each other, and the chimney looked like it had smoke going through it. Somebody was cooking and eating there. The victims in the barn had suffered horrendous injuries that I'm gonna list out, but it's only very, very sad and scary. The grandmother was found to have 8 holes on the right side of her skull, while Victoria had 9. Strangely, Victoria also had strangulation marks on her neck. The young granddaughter, I am so sad to say this, but 7-year-old Cecilia was found to be in even worse state. She had 1 hole on the right side of her face, but she also suffered a smashed jaw when the killer used an iron band that was later found to hit her head, assuming to silence her, maybe because she was making too much noise. She's a kid. Her throat was slit with a pocket knife, and the young girl was also found half naked. It was also known that Cecilia suffered before she died because there were signs of her pulling out clumps of her own hair, maybe out of frustration, before she even died to her wounds. And both of the items that were used to kill them actually belonged to Andreas, who suffered coincidentally very, very different injuries. The police found that he died from a fall onto the tip of the heavy pickaxe. So it looks like he died because he fell, not because somebody hit him.
Maybe he ran away or something.
Could be, but falling exactly on the pickaxe is a bit... The wound tore open his carotid artery, causing him to bleed to death within a very short period of time. The flesh was torn open on the right side of his cheek, and the cheekbone was protruding out of his face. But he only had that one injury, nothing else. Nothing as significant as the other women in the house. Inside the house, Maria, the maid, suffered injuries to the face on the right side of the head and was found to have died from at least 1 hole at the top of her skull. The young 2-year-old baby Joseph had been slaughtered inside his bassinet and died from a single powerful blow to the right side of his skull. Not only did the killer was suspected to have made himself at home after they killed them, but the police has also found traces of someone living and even pooping at the top of the barn, where the hayloft is, which means that someone had been living there even before the murders happened. Now, one of the first suspects that police put forward was Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband that had died in World War I. They're saying that because his body was never recovered, they made a theory that maybe he came back and killed them because he was jealous that Victoria had another son. But this is not proven, and we don't know if it's real or not, you know? But this also presents another suspect, the neighbor, Lawrence. The neighbor that found them and the neighbor that said that Joseph was his son. Remember, Lawrence came with 2 friends that found the body. Apparently, when they arrived to the house, it was locked, and they had to break open the gate to the farmstead. But funny thing is, when they were leaving, he was unable to unlock the front with a key, and then when they left, he came back and suspiciously entered the house alone, where he found the maid and Joseph with the key that was missing. Remember?
Yeah.
Andreas lost the key.
Huh?
So he had the key. But because he was Victoria's lover, people maybe said that he was given the key and then he went back to the house after seeing that Victoria was dead. He was like, where's my son? Where's my son Joseph? Many people believe though that he actually killed them because he had disturbed the bodies at the crime scene. And he also knew specific details that only the killer would know. So when he went inside the barn, he actually did something really weird and disturbed all the bodies. And police said that he kept saying things that only the killer would know, but it was not strong enough to convict him in the case. The police said that his motive for killing was because Victoria had asked him for money since he was the father of Joseph. Another theory, which is the most interesting one that I read, is that the killer was none other than Andreas himself, the grandfather.
I also thought so.
One theory puts forward the idea that Andreas, the patriarch of the Gruber Gabriel family, was the murderer who cold-bloodedly beat his family members to death, and this would account for the way in which the killer seemingly remained at the farmstead for the next 3 days, because he was the killer and it's his house, so where else would he go? So people think that maybe he's the one cooking, he's the one still living in the house, and then most likely he was killed by someone else the day after he committed the gruesome crimes. This is put forward because his injuries were so different than the rest of the people. Everyone had blows to the right side of the skull, where he looked like he just fell on the pig.
Yeah.
And also remember that the day before they died, Victoria had a fight with her parents and then she ran out and then she came back. Maybe that also could be the motive. Another one that supports this theory is that the young granddaughter was found half naked and only her, assumed to have been done by the killer, which Andreas would fit since it was known that he was into little kids and he abused his daughter and he was a rapist. So the theory also goes ahead to say that on that day, Lawrence came to meet Victoria and he saw everyone's bodies and then he found Andreas sleeping, and so he went and killed Andreas, is what people also believe. Which is why Lawrence knew details about the murder that nobody else could know. So maybe he found the bodies, he didn't want to incriminate himself, he got so angry, he killed Andreas and then he didn't know what to do. So he just went back and then he acted like he found the bodies. And over the years, people have constantly reopened and closed and reopened the case, and some netizens also tried to find out about what happened. But the case obviously still remains unsolved, and what stands today are only theories. Well, what do you think about this mystery?
My theory is that the last one, the killer was Andres, and then Andres got killed.
Yeah, by the neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
It is one of the more plausible ones, but until this day, nobody could really prove it because there was no forensic evidence at that time. So that's it for the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders. I wonder if there's any other evidence that I left out, but if I did, please tell me and I'm gonna read up more on it. So if you're someone who loves creepy stories based on legends, just tune in for episodes on all podcasting platforms and Diskies on Tuesdays and my episodes on Fridays. That's all. Bye!